suis prêt. I hit 87 in December. I can't believe it. Montreal is where I spent most of my life. Très jeune, quelles étaient vos aspirations professionnelles? And it was hockey. I wanted to be a hockey player like most Canadians. So I'll explain to you a little bit of the history. My dad came from Switzerland. He had a degree in horticulture. So when he came to Montreal and to Quebec, he started off by working for wealthy people in the Westmount area. And what he did, he shoveled their snow, he cut their grass, and he also shoveled the coal in their furnaces. He came to Canada because he had three brothers who were watchmakers. And the three of them brought over, and that's when she met my dad, and that's where they got married here in Montreal. We have talked about, and I've been asked, Claude Daccord, comment ça se fait que vous êtes plus à l'aise en anglais qu'en français? And the answer is simple. My parents were from French Switzerland, so when I was young, we spoke French at home. When it came time for my mom to register from schools, we went to register at the French Catholic school. When my mother filled out the form, they had religion, and my mother was a Protestant. Out the door we went. We weren't welcome. So my mom had no choice but to go to an English school. So my brother and I were educated in English and did university in English. And a lot of times, I have such a nice name, Daccord, like I mentioned the other day, Daccord pour le jardin. It's so nice when I used to go into a prospective, say a business, and the reception, I gave my card and they say, Daccord. And they would say, est-ce que Monsieur Daccord toujours d'accord? And I would answer, oui, entre 11h le soir puis 7h le matin. And I can remember later on as a young guy, seeing my dad with a big ring of keys. And it was the keys that he had to enter his customer's home to do the things that he did. And then he told me the story of when the Depression hit around 1933, several of his customers parked their car in the garage and left the motor run, committed suicide. It was that bad back at that time. We had a truck in our backyard, and all our neighbors disliked us because of the noise that it made. And my brother and I, every evening, we were poor to start off with, the family, and I'd have to go down in the basement with my brother and to kill the mice, because he kept grass, seed, and different things in the basement. So that was our job. And when we used to go out in a dump truck, and my brother and I took chairs to sit in the back. And at times I felt uncomfortable where we would go on a dump truck, or if he dropped me off at school, that was it. And his birthday was on April the 1st, which is April Fool's Day. And I can recall he always used to come home for lunch, and he always went for a siesta every afternoon. So what I managed with my brother and a couple of friends was to take his car, move it down the street, and put it in a parking lot behind the grocery store. And then when he left, it was unbelievable how he screamed and yelled and everything. That's when we said that was April Fool's Day. And what I did in the summertime, I used to go and work with him and with my brother at hard labor. And it was interesting. I used to go down in the evenings and grab a truck and learn how to drive it, and get on a tractor and learn how to drive it, all on my time. And one of the things which was I knew I had to prove was to his employees, because you were the son of the owner or the boss, you had to work twice as hard to earn their respect. And I worked awfully hard at that. Well, I can remember where I got my driver's license at 15, when the law at that time was 16.
Wow.
But my dad knew one of the guys that worked there, and he gave me a driving license at the age of 15. So then I was intrigued by equipment and everything, and that's when I used to go down in the evening and grab a truck in the yard, not out in the street, just drive it back and forth and sit on a tractor, and that's the way I learned to run the equipment. So there, in my business, there wasn't one part of the job that I had never done. I knew what it was the labor. I knew what it was to drive a truck, so I could understand my staff, the way they felt and what they did, and that's the way I learned it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I decided I was coming back from Vancouver, I played a little hockey out there, and I came back through the Canadian Rockies. And in Vancouver, they have some beautiful Stanley Park and parks. And I really, really started to say, hey, maybe this is what I want to do, because I realized I wasn't good enough in hockey to make it in the NHL. But driving through the Canadian Rockies and going to Banff and Lake Louise and seeing all the beautiful forests and everything, I decided this is what I wanted to do. And I tried to look in Quebec or in Canada, where could I get an education in this? And there was nothing available. And then I started to look in the US, and I came up to the two best schools that stayed in our climate zone was Cornell and Michigan State. And then I was accepted at Michigan State. And probably that was what really, really turned me on to about my profession and what I've accomplished in my profession.
You studied in
landscape design and management, and we had kids students from different parts of the United States, but I wanted to stay in the northern part, that their climatic conditions and the type of plant material we couldn't use would be as close to Quebec or Montreal as possible. So I went to Michigan State, and then I did small business management at McGill at night. And what I did, it was a 2-year program, but I didn't want to spend time on courses that weren't interested, so I picked out the courses that I wanted. What I did also when I was at Michigan State, I used to attend, or all the students, we had to attend the Michigan State Landscapers Association conventions. And also I took the opportunity to drive down through the state of Ohio. And the state of Ohio had many, many production nurseries. So I was able to go and see the growing end, the production nurseries, and go visit them and everything. That was a big help to me, Jack. When I can remember leaving and saying to myself, what do you want to accomplish? Who do you want to be? And I knew that being designers and architects and contractors, that no one was the best. It was like a painting to me. I could look at this painting, fall in love with it. Jack Lavoie could look at it, didn't mean anything to him. So I think the style that we had in our companies, the style of our work and the quality of our work was important. So I said to myself, can't be the best. I want to be one of the best. And that's actually what happened, I think. I know that relationships between a father and a son in a business can go two ways. It can be great and it can be difficult. And because you don't see things the same way, you come from a different generation. And I was in that situation where we didn't agree on certain things. So therefore I ended up borrowing money, and then I bought out his business. And then I kept him busy till the age of 82, and I had to find places to give him something to fulfill his days and everything, and we got along fine. But because I was making the decisions I wanted, whether they were right or whether they were wrong. Okay. So that was a challenge in itself. But I've always had, or I always did have, a tremendous relationship with my mother. And I can remember when I decided to go to college, my dad wasn't for it. He didn't want me to go. He wanted me to stay and work with him. And the morning that I left for Michigan State. My mother took me in her arms, gave me $20, said, "That's all I can afford, Claude, make me proud." And,
Wow.
and I think I did. So my relationship with my mother was very, very close.
Bravo,
And
man.
when the decision came to move my dad out of the contracting end and pricing all that, I then went to see her, talked to her about it, and I moved him out to, at that time, where I had started a large tree production nursery in St. Polycarp in Quebec. And I put my dad there, and he was very, very happy there.
Okay.
And so we had a good relationship outside of the business. And yeah, he was a big factor in my life. And but my mother she was incredible. She lived to the age of 97. And a year before she passed away, she told me it was time. She was a Swiss independent woman, and she couldn't take all the home care in a retirement home. People would come and get her in the morning and wheel her to breakfast and lunch and supper. And almost to the day, a year later, is when she passed away in her sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So she to me was a huge part of my success. Was my relationship with my mother. And
Mm-hmm.
going back to you want to know a little bit more about the kids, I was able to afford to send all three of them to private schools. And the two boys went to Loyola High. And they were both athletes. Hockey was important, and it was to me too. And anyways, both of them ended up getting scholarships to the United States. Brian went to Boston. He had a full scholarship. And Tom made it to Princeton. And that was different. It's not scholarships, it's what they call financial aid. And if a student measures up, they want them, they will put financial aid. So every year I had to give them my T4s. They'd analyze it, see how many other kids I had going to school and everything. So they gave Tom a job where he worked every week, and they gave him a job in the summertime. And I would pay what I could afford to pay. And when he graduated, he owed them a fairly sized loan. So then he went to Switzerland, and he played professional hockey, and he did teaching. And between that and between what I did, we paid off his loan. And then he went on and he got a master's degree. And then after that, today, he has a successful business in education. As you know, he worked with me for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then he fell in love with a woman from Boston. And that was, I could not show him the disappointment I had to put on my father's cap. And I didn't want him to see or feel anything because he left. It was hard. I had him for 3 years, and he and I are just like that.
Mm-hmm.
So in Brian's case, I knew what his profession was going to be. I took him to his first Canadian Toronto hockey game at the Montreal Forum. When that kid was, he was about 10 years old, 10, 11. When he walked down the alleyway to get in and to see the whole arena, I looked at his face and I said to myself, one day hockey is going to be important to him. The day after that I took him to the game, I think it was on a Saturday night, he had a game on Sunday afternoon. They won 5-0 and he scored all 5 goals.
Wow.
He was so inspired by what he saw.
Yeah.
And then he came to me one day, he says, "Dad, I want to be a goaler." I said, "Over my dead body. You got to be nuts to be a goaler." I said, "Look at your brother, Tom. He started as a goaler, and then he came to me and said, 'Dad, I'm sick and tired of being cold and out there.'" So he switched, but I didn't want to let Brian change to be a goaler. Finally, he convinced me. So what I did, I put a rink in my backyard with boards. I put a light in the trees, and the whole neighborhood would come and play in our backyard. Floyd Curry, who I mentioned you before, got me an old practice net from the Montreal Canadiens. So Tom and I used to go out hour after hour after hour shooting pucks at Brian. And And look where he is today
Yeah.
and what goaltending has brought to him.
Okay.
Anyway, so he had his U.S. scholarship. He played in the top division in Europe and Switzerland for about 7 years. He met his wife there. I went there for the wedding. Subsequent to that, when he came back to Boston, he was named head coach of one of the major junior A teams. And then the Boston Bruins came and interviewed him, and they hired him as their goaltending coach. So he spent several years in that, and then decided to go into business for himself. Started up a company called Stop It Goaltending, and they train about 200 goalers a week in 5 different locations.
Wow.
And yeah, and then from there, he worked for the Toronto Leafs as their goaltending consultant. They would send him to Russia, to Sweden, different countries, all to analyze and value goaltenders. And
Wow.
today he is the assistant general manager of the Arizona Coyotes in the NHL, and he runs his business too. So for a guy that played for Sam Pollock, me, and then to have my 2 boys play hockey, which I loved. I used to drive down the U.S. to watch them play and everything. So Brian got a master's degree in sports administration also, and he did this in the off season when he was not playing. So they both ended up following their passion. Tom was education. I still have in a drawer here, Jack. Excuse me if I take some water.
Go for it.
A letter, a 9-page letter that I received from Tom when he's at Princeton of what he wanted to do with his life. And it was to teach. And he said, if I can influence, and you met Tom.
Yes.
And it's through Tom that I met you, because he came back from a meeting and he told me he had met you. He said, Dad, you and him, you would like him. And look what happened. We became really good friends. I used to take the boys to all their games. I used to all their practices. And the same thing with my daughter. She took up ringette. And to this day, she's 53. She's still playing hockey with women in Richmond Hill, Ontario. And she remembers that I came to all her practices, all her games, because I wanted to be fair to all my 3 kids. And so today she's a proud mother of 3 fine grandkids for me. And but she's still playing hockey. So when I say hockey, had a big role in my life, but most of all, it was that it helped them get their education at a price that I could afford. And I'm always grateful for that opportunity. But I kept telling them all the time, your education comes first. And if hockey can give you your education first, hockey second. And it's worked out. They've all got great educations because of hockey. And the last step, I guess, in the hockey part is my grandson. And he and I are very close, my older grandson. And he was a forward and decided to become a goaler. And I followed him since he played high school. And then he was drafted by the Ottawa Senators when he was probably around 15 or 16. And then he got a scholarship to Arizona State University.
Mhm.
And he did great. And then Ottawa signed him, and he just signed a 3-year contract with the Ottawa Senators. And he had his first year last year, and he did really well. They started him in the ECHL league, which is normal. Then in Ottawa, they had an injury, so they moved him up to Belleville, which is the American League, and he beat out both the goalers. And at the end of the season, which was called off because of the pandemic, he had then become #1 goaler. So at the beginning of the year, he was like probably 7th on their depth chart for the Ottawa. And right now he's being put on what they call the taxi squad. So he's probably 3rd in the Ottawa thing now. So hockey was big for me and it was big for them. But the most important thing, Jack, is that I told them, follow your passion. Doesn't matter whether you're going to be a painter, a landscaper, a doctor, or a lawyer. You're going to do it for 35, 40 years of your life. You got to get up in the morning and say, I'm looking forward. I got something to do. Other thing, Jack, you're talking about family, was in my life, if I could afford to give my children the best education possible, to give them a nice home to be raised in, and I never felt money. I've always said that you can only eat 3 meals a day. You can only sleep in one bed at night, and you can only drive one car at one time. Why do you need? So therefore, having satisfied customers, I loved what I did. And if I won a lot of awards in my career, like I said, it's a bit because that was my philosophy. I could not leave a project if it wasn't to my standards. To be successful in our profession, you had to have the passion. And I had a lot of young students came to me, and I would tell them point blank, if you're not ready to work harder for 8 months of the year and sacrifice time with your family and other things that you would like to do, you had to have the passion. And I've told several students over the years, if you don't have the passion, do something else with your life. I think what drove me, first of all, I love nature, and that you have to. And I love to create. And when people ask me what I did in my life, in my career, I don't say we were landscape architects, designers, and contractors. I say I create environments to make people happy.
Okay.
Jack, that's what we do. That's what we do, is create environments to make people happy. I started off basically as a landscape contractor. Back in that time, Jack, landscape architects were maybe 3 in Montreal back at that time. And one of them I can remember was a brother of W.S. Perron. And W.S. Perron was the largest, and at that time, probably the best garden center nursery people in all of Quebec. What I had to do was start costing every job, which my dad didn't do. And every job that we did, I want to know exactly what our gross profits were. And you learn by experience. And that was so important to me. And I made my mistakes. We all make, and that's the way you learn. You learn that next time you're not going to make that same mistake.
Okay.
And it costs you. It costs you from your pocket. You have to make a decision. Do I stop here, or do I do what I want to do and make the job as perfect as I can, and with me, perfect as I can? So with the years, you learn. And at the end, before I retired, we had everything on computers. We controlled everything, every hour, every man, every piece of material went in the computer every night. And so when I came to the office, I had every morning in front of me where we were, and then I could look at them and call in my foreman and say to him, hey, this job, we're way behind. I want you to push on this one. So that way you could look, but I made my mistakes. I lost money, but that's the way you get experience. It's not something that you can just learn out of a book. And you got to be out in the field, on the job, on the contract, and realize all the other problems, physical problems that arise on a job site where you have to share with other contractors and plumbers and all kinds of things. In my business, be honest with you, making the profit wasn't a priority. The foreman called me up and he said, Claude, tomorrow we're going to finish this job. Come make your tour. And I'd come make my tour. And I'd look at it and I say, oh my gosh, over here I need another tree. over here, I need a couple of more roses, send the truck, get it out of my pocket. And if I won a lot of awards in my career, I think it's because the part of being a little bit of a perfectionist. It had to be right for me. I had to leave that job site feeling, hey, it's good. And if it wasn't, I'd make it good. And even if it came out of my pocket. And it didn't take me long to realize that the money that we were spending on advertising, whether it be newspapers and the telephone book, whatever, weren't very important. And I made a decision. The most important advertising that I can do is the quality of my work. And I still believe it. And the most important is that you do quality work, so then when family members or neighbors or friends come to your home and they look at the landscaping and they say, wow, who did this? It was Jack Lavoie did it. And that is the best advertising that I think anyone in our profession can do, is the quality of your work. And you can spend a lifetime trying to build a reputation and you can lose it in 1 year. Start doing lousy jobs and your reputation will go like that. So to me, in terms of advertising, the quality of our work was so important.
Absolutely.
So I wanted my company to grow and I wanted X number of employees and I wanted to be totally in control. I wanted every customer that had a problem could pick up the phone and he would get closed. So therefore, I limited myself in terms of the way I wanted my business. I wanted to be in control. I wanted to meet. It wasn't all about growing the company, because when I did Expo, I hired a lot of people and I lost control and I wasn't happy. And I mean, that's a decision that I made. I was usually working with about 25 employees, 25, 30, and that was it. And that way I had control on everything. I knew what was going on everywhere. And that's a decision I made, that being the biggest or the largest company, no. Again, trying to be one of the best. Maybe to give you a couple of highlights of my career, I guess one of the top ones commercial-wise would have been Expo 67. And I was very involved. And it was talk about pressure. I used to get up at 6 a.m, run my crews and manage my business during the day, come home for supper at 6 o'clock, eat dinner and then go to sleep, and then get up at midnight and go down to the Expo site at 1 o'clock in the morning and spend the night there. Wow. The reason being is the Expo site was 1 month in arrears. Ooh. So therefore, what happened? We were the last people on the sites. And guess what? The contracts I had, I think I had 7 or 8 pavilions that I did, and they all finished at the same time. And I'm the last guy, we were the last guy on the site. Expo would never have been the success it was if it hadn't been managed by the Canadian Army. And the one in charge was a Colonel Churchill. And you didn't go to meetings, the 3-piece suits. You go to a meeting and say, hey, you Daccord, the French pavilion is yours. Monday morning, you got 3 days and get the hell out of there. So Monday morning, I arrive with trees and trucks and men, and I find 25 cars on the site.
Oh, shit.
The opening day, Jack, of Expo, the RCMP chased me and my crews. The opening ceremonies were 2:30 in the afternoon, had presidents from all over the world and some VIP people. And the RCMP chased me off the site. We had just finished the Greek Pavilion, and the Greek Pavilion had an open space, and that's where we planted trees and all that. We needed a crane to lift the trees up, over, and down. During the last week, they had a coup in the government in Greece, and all the people I dealt with were all gone, but I wasn't getting paid. So I made a call into Expo and they gave me an interpreter, and we had a meeting set up at the Greek Pavilion. We waited 3 hours. And they said, that's the norm, Claude, we're gonna stay. We stayed 3 hours, and then they explained everything. And the new guy took out a checkbook out of his pocket and wrote me a check. And I said, oh, tomorrow morning I'm going in and it's gonna bounce, but it didn't. Expo for me was a huge, huge challenge. I was young in my 30s and learning. I made some mistakes, but I learned. But to have been part of Expo, and today is still considered the greatest world fair that was ever held. And Russia had won the rights, and 1 year later they backed out. And then they asked Canada if they would take it on. Normally it takes about 8 years to prepare the design, the architectures, and everything that goes out having a World's Fair. We did it in 3 years. It is an incredible story and landscaping and the St. Lawrence River and everything that I learned from horticulture. Couldn't do that at Expo. I did a lot of things that was against nature. And you know what? I never lost a tree or a plant.
Wow.
In the St. Lawrence with the work that was going on and the other contractors there. But it was the greatest romance, I think, in Canada for Canadians, whether we were Anglophone, Francophone, anywhere. It was 6 months of being so proud to be a Canadian.
Mhm.
And so Expo to me was like, it was a highlight from my commercial and the experience I had there and the pressure. I've never had pressure like that. And you can imagine it if you've got 7 or 8 pavilions and they're all ready for you at the same time. The pressure that we were under. And the reason I got up and went down every night at 1 o'clock in the morning is because we were working under lights. Otherwise, we would have never, ever would have finished. And that is why on opening day, I'll always remember the RCMP chasing us off the site. And they were just having the, so it was great, Jack. But I met some interesting people because the mayor of Expo was Philippe de Gaspé-Beaubien. Then after the Expo was finished, he hired me to landscape his home in Westmount. And the labor minister was Jean Cournoyer. And when I worked for Jean Cournoyer, it was during the time when the federal government sent in the army into Quebec.
Okay, yeah.
And one day I was standing outside his home, 10, 15 minutes away from here. And he said to me, Claude, this is no way to live. He said, they pick up my kids. I've got to drive them to school, bring them back. He said, I have army guys walking around my house continually 24 hours a day. And about a short time later, he resigned as labor minister and he went in and built himself a tremendous career as a radio guy. From the residential side, the greatest project that I did was for a Robert Gratton, who was the CEO of Power Corporation. And I had landscaped his home in Outremont, put in swimming pools and did a really nice job for him. And one day I was having coffee with him and he turned to me and he said, Claude, why didn't I think of you? And I said, think of me for what? He said, I never told you about my property that I own in the Eastern Townships. I said, no. He said, I hired 2 American architects to come and work, and I have problems up there. Will you come and visit? Well, anyways, I went up there and toured the property with him, and I've never seen a residential project like that, Jack. He had on his own, just to maintain the property, he had over 25 gardeners.
Wow.
To maintain the property. It was called Belleville and it was in Georgeville. And he had rented it. And then after that, he had bought it. It is unbelievable, everything that was done there. So I got involved there, took it over. And for the next, I think at least 6 years, I had crews and 1 architect up there to run the job for him from spring to fall.
My God.
And I don't want you to get the impression that all I did was work for wealthy people. No, I worked for I used to get the big charge if it was a young couple who just got married and they had a couple $1,000s to spend. And we would go in there in 1 or 2 days and we'd landscape and see them so happy and everything. That's where I got my gratitude from. And another one that was, I could speak a half hour on all of these subjects, but would have been the home of Charles Bonfin in Westmount. And the architects were from New York. And the main thing they said to me, Claude, we don't want you to plant for what it's going to be in 3 years. We want you to do it that it looks mature as always. And I think I was probably the only one that got permission to go and dig trees at the Morgan Arboretum on the West Island to bring on his project.
Wow.
While I was working there, Jack, I got a call from the Expos. And they said, we want to install a pitching mound and a home plate so he can throw a ball with his son. So they supplied me all the equipment and I put it in. And we worked there. It took us probably 2 seasons to finish the work. And I can recall it was late in the fall. And the architect in New York said, Claude, when are you going to put down the sod? I said, it's too late. It's going to be too late. He says, Claude, you can't leave Charles with his family walking in the mud in the spring. Do something. So I did something. I went out to Richer, my sod supplier. I ordered them to all the sod that I needed, put it on pallets, put it on the side of the road. And then we will come and pick it up. And I remember it was in around December the 9th or the 10th. So we would load up the transport trucks and we would bring the transport truck into Seagram's warehouse in Ville La Salle. And in the morning, the boss over there would call me up and he'd say, hey, Claude, your sod is now distilled. And we bring the sod down the 9th or 10th. We had prepared the soil, everything. It was gorgeous in the spring.
Great.
And I had a very good relationship with Charles. And one winter I was down in Florida for a vacation with my parents. So I said to my dad, I said, could I borrow your car tomorrow? I said, I want to go up and see a baseball spring training. I've never seen it. It was the second year of the Expos. I said, sure. So I went up there and I start walking into the stadium and I see Charles Bronfman in his Expo uniform. Hey, Claude, how are you? Why don't you come have dinner with us? So I went and had dinner with him before the game. And I sat there with him, John McHale, Gene Mock, manager, Bill Stoneman, I think, was there, one of the pitchers, and our former Prime Minister, Lester Pearson.
Oh.
So here I am having dinner with all these people. And at the end, Lester Pearson, most people wouldn't recognize him. He was in shorts, a t-shirt, and I think he had an eye removed and he had a patch. And he said, Claude, you staying for the game? I said, sure. He says, come sit with me. So for 2.5 hours, I listened to all the amazing stories that he told me, how when they used to go visit in Russia and how they had cameras in their room and how his wife liked one of the guys, Russian guys in charge of the security, and she would tell him just a few things so he could look good in front of his bosses. And then at the end of the game, says, Claude, I'm staying at the hotel. He was the honorary president of the Montreal Expos. So he says, you drive me back to my hotel? I said, my pleasure. So when I got home, my mother said to me, she said, how'd your day go?
It's a long story.
And I said, one of the wonderful days that I had. And I'll tell you another story on as far as doing his project. It was back around 1972. And you know, at that time, it was the irrigation systems were just starting up. Yeah. So we were putting in an irrigation system, and the job superintendent came to me and he says, what the hell are you doing now, Claude? And I said, we're putting in a sprinkling system. We're going to put in a computer. And I said, then everything's going to be watered. We'll organize it. It'll water from, say, 12 o'clock at night, and it has to run through the whole system. So he said to me, he said, well, what do you put in there? And I said to myself, is he normal? can't figure out, it's water. And then he turned around and he said, no, he said, you got to run Seagram's whiskey through that. And he said, the grass will be half cut. I worked for all kinds of people. And I had one role model was David Culver, and he was the CEO of Alcan. And he called me for an interview. So then he showed me some plans, and he was in Westmount on the hill, needed walls and all that. And the plan showed, redwood ties and all that kind of stuff. And after I saw it all, I said, Mr. Culver, I'm sorry, I'm not going to give you a quote on this. He says, why? Because it's not going to stand up. Those ties are going to rot. And I said, the walls are going to come down. So he said, well, what will you do? I can do the same thing, but I want to build the walls with natural stone and with a waterfall and everything. And he turned around to me, he said, when can you start?
Oh, gosh.
We had to use conveyor belts. He was such a gentleman, traveled the world, and he walked every day from his home in Westmount to Place Ville Marie to his office every day and walked back. And a lot of employees would stop to give him a lift and he wouldn't take it. He was such a gentleman. He was a role model to me. And he said to me, Claude, he said, when I have a board of directors meeting, I never scream or intimidate any of my employees, but they understand if I say no, it's no. So he was a role model for me, Jack, to be very honest with you.
Mhm.
To sit down in his home, have a coffee with him and listen to him. And it was exciting. So when I was young and starting off, I had a project to do in town of Mount Royal. And then one day I looked across the street and was Milan Avelin who was doing the project. And he worked very, very well.
Okay.
And I knew when I watched him work, I had a lot to learn.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and I got to know him very well. And then at the end of his career, when he had a problem with his partner and dissolved the company, that he then went and worked for W.H. Perron for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked after their landscaping because W.H. Perron was more of a garden center type of nursery that there was. So I had a lot of respect for him. And it was an inspiration to have him working across the street and say, wow, what nice work he does.
So clear. What are some of the difficult moments during the career?
One of them is a very sad story. I'll relate it to you. And it had to do with people. In the time, we hired a lot of Spanish and Portuguese workers. And there was one who really stood out. I took him and I built him into my supervisor. He became a very good friend. I would go to all her weddings and he would come to all of my family things. And then I found out that he was stealing.
Oh,
And I think in our industry, there's probably a lot of it going on, but we don't, being in the nature of the business we are, especially me, I had him bring his brother-in-law from Spain, gave him all work. Then his brother, he had two nephews. I hired them when they got out of CJEP. And unknown to me, maybe you do the same thing, but at that time, I let the foreman take the trucks home with them. Because in the mornings, they usually picked up some men and brought them to our depot. So what they were doing on weekends were using my trucks and things and doing jobs on the side. And I never knew because I considered him a really good friend of mine. And I took very good care of him.
mm-hmm.
And then I found out that he was stealing.
Wow.
It was all organized. It was him, his brother. There was 5 of the family that were in on this. And I found this out late in our career, and he may have stolen large amounts of money from me. And we had the controls. We had the computers, and every morning he had to file in all the jobs that were going on, all the materials and the hours that went in on each project. So what he was doing when they were doing jobs on the side, the hours were being manipulated so the bookkeeper couldn't pick it up. And then one day I just found one project, too many hours. And that's when I discovered what had happened. So then it was time that he had to retire. And when I found all this out, Jack, it hurt me like really very, very hurt deeply because I trusted him. I helped him. I brought most of his family here. And I don't know how much he could have stolen, but I'm sure it's a large amount of money. Befriended my family, the kids. That was probably the toughest thing that happened to me. And I think our industry doesn't pay enough attention to an area that we don't like to look at, think of some of our employees could be taking advantage of us.
Mhm.
Then he fell sick. I had gone to see my lawyers because I wanted to pursue them. And he fell sick and he died.
Oh my gosh.
And then one of his nephews, who was a supervisor for me on some jobs, he had 4 sons. And they went out and partied one night and he came and anyways, he died in his bed.
Oh my gosh.
And then I sat back and I said, they've been punished.
Yeah.
He's dead. His nephew's dead.
Mm-hmm.
Stopped it. So I stopped the legal action that I wanted to take against them.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt that they paid a big price with both of them with their deaths.
Exactly.
So that was probably, for me, had nothing to do with the work or what we were doing.
No.
Well, that was the saddest time in my career.
Exactly.
And we have, I think, being in our business, we have a tendency to be the nice guys, to please, to, go all out. One other thing that I probably should not have done was to get involved as architects and designers, having a garden center and starting a production nursery in St. Polycarp. And I feel like it was too much because they all were busy at the same time.
Exactly.
All of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you could only work so many hours a day. And I think it would have been smarter back then to reduce and maybe look for something for the winter that would keep my staff busy and it would keep me involved. So I try to do 3, and no, it wasn't a good time for that. We usually opened up here in Montreal around the 15th of April and closed down around the 15th of November.
Mm-hmm.
And during the winter, well, we kept the architects busy and everything. But when it came the middle of November and I had to lay people off, I found that difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Although they all went on UIC and they worked for a snow removal guy or something, some of them made more money in the winter than they did in the season. But for me, to lay people off at the end of the season was difficult. When I was young and I thought still foolish, I went in and snow removal. And I made some mistakes because I had no experience. I took over the Rockland Shopping Center.
Okay.
First contract that I had GM and I had Avon. Oh my God, that's, you couldn't leave. You go out for dinner, your family, you come home, 10, 11 o'clock at night, the phone rings, out you go, call all the staff and I get all the equipment ready. In the spring, the clutches were burnt and this and that. And one day I did it only for the employees and they came to me and they said, Claude, we're tired of doing snow too. And he said, we'll stay on UIC during the winter time. Some of them I would give a little extra to get through the winter. And I got out of the snow removal business. And the other area that I had trouble with, and especially I fought it on behalf of the association, was that at one point I felt the construction industry was taking over the landscape industry.
Okay.
And I can recall with the association, I went to Quebec City and I met the assistant minister of labor and pleaded and explained what we were doing, because the contractors now apart from contracting the buildings, they wanted to contract all the landscaping and be involved in it. So then the government made certain restrictions, like we were into stonework, and they were trying to say, oh, that has to be done by stonemasons, not landscapers. Then when the pavers started to come in, they say, oh no, that's construction work. So that was difficult, but we won a lot of points with the government, and I think now we're in a better state than we were back then. And Jack, our industry back then, we had no recognition, not the recognition that we deserved. To emphasize that, I remember once I gave my card to a potential customer. She turned around to me and she saw Michigan State, and she said, "You went to college to learn how to run a lawnmower?"
Oh my gosh.
That, I'm just telling you, that was the way it was way back when. I can remember in Quebec or in Montreal, W.H. Perron was a big one, but he had a brother by the name of Louis Perron, who was a landscape architect, graduated from Cornell. And I did some projects with him. But back at that time, in Montreal, did you have 3 landscape architects? Nobody really looked at our industry with respect. But we have made so much progress in our industry that now cities and a lot of people won't have any work done unless there's a plan done to start off with. So now you've got tons and tons of landscape architects and concepteurs des jardins. They're doing design work. Some of the cities won't let you bid if you don't have a proper certification. We, as an industry, and I'm so happy about it, have got recognition, large recognition that we never had way back when. Exactly. And the industry at that time, to me, was like a free-for-all. And anybody could do landscaping, and you just had to go out and buy a wheelbarrow and a truck, and you're in the landscape business. There were no controls, there was no associations or things of that nature. So I'm so pleased to see the respect that our industry gets today, how the associations have played a big role in it. But that's the way it was before. It was a free-for-all. It really was. Okay. And very few qualified. I look at all the wonderful, I think they're wonderful kids that go in St. Hyacinth's for 2 years. Some of those guys come out, you know what? Their designs are better than landscape architects.
Exactly, yeah.
Because they focus on the garden part. And I think it's amazing when you look in Quebec, how many of the top firms now that all went to the institute in St. Hyacinth's, and what a terrific job they do.
Exactly, yeah.
I can also remember I was probably the first one to ever enter from Quebec the awards program in the United States. We test our projects against the best in the United States.
Yeah.
And I won, I think, 2 awards the first year I went there. And I can remember when I had to go back and get the awards. And I remember the guy that presented me with the awards, he said, "We can't believe the beautiful landscaping that is done in a Nordic climate." He says, "My God, Montreal, Quebec, you got winner for 5 months." They were so impressed, and I spoke to you, and you entered, and you also won.
Yeah, I had with the same comments. It was great. Yeah.
And Jack, the quality of the landscaping is done in Quebec, in my opinion, is top notch. And like we spoke about my dad, and my dad, I can remember I was probably 11 years old, and we were poor at the time. And when all these gardeners and landscapers got together to form an association, and I can remember I couldn't sleep because they were screaming and yelling at each other, and they were having meetings at each other's home. That's how the association started. And my dad was involved, and he was a president. And that, I have a plaque here on a wall from 1947. It gives the names of all the companies that formed formed the association. There's W.H. Perron, there was Canadian Shade Tree, there was Jack Vincelli. The list is all there. And I was looking at it before I started to talk to you, and I don't think there's one firm left
Wow.
of all the original ones from 1947. But being part of the association, I remember when I joined, W.H. Perron at the time was the biggest firm in all of Quebec. And he was like a mentor to me when I was a member of the association, encouraged me with my thinking and what I want to do. Apart from him being a really nice guy, and he was a leader in our industry. I got to get involved with the association. And being involved meant giving up a lot of your time and money. And I used to, especially when I was president, traveled and went to most of the conventions. At one point, I was president of the American Association chapter in Canada, and I was probably president of maybe 5 different landscape organizations. And you know how I feel about it, and how I think the members should devote much of their time and a lot of their money into the association. Because for me, if I had success, a lot of it has to do with the people that I met, the chance that I had to travel. And one of the nice things that happened between Quebec and Ontario was that every year, Quebec, when we had our convention, would invite the president from Ontario and his wife to come to our convention, and we took care of it all. And then when it was the Ontario convention, they would they would bring the president for Quebec, and it created, which we don't have anymore.
Yeah.
But the association is so important,
Mm-hmm.
and the members got to realize it's not another member who's your competition. You're in the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
You're competing against the boats and the golf courses and everything that goes on during the summertime.
Exactly.
That's who our competition is as an industry.
Mm-hmm.
So you got to give. And you look at the most successful ones like W.H. Perron at that time and everything, they were all involved in the associations.
Mm-hmm.
You got to give to
Yeah.
get, and I got so much. Well, I think the future of the industry is great, and I think the industry, like I said the other day, has made tremendous progress as an industry. And I'll give you an example. A real estate person once said to me, if they had a client coming in, say, from Toronto, and they had 5 homes to show them here, said the most important is a curb service. He said, I could bring someone to a house, and the gardens didn't have to be botanical gardens, but if they were neat and clean and trimmed. But if they weren't, sometimes the client would leave and say, let's go to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
And that is why these real estate people always told me that to improve the value of your home, that the kitchen was number 1. And the second one was the landscaping. So therefore, when the client or the customer invests in landscaping, it adds value to their home. Number 2 after the kitchen. I thought that was quite impressive. When I got out of college, I started to draft plans. And I said, this is not what I want to do for the rest of my life. I want to be involved. I want to do the projects. I want to meet with the customers. I don't want to sit behind a desk with a drafting board. So that's when I hired an architect to do it. And that's how I got more involved in what I wanted to do. And always it was the quality of the work was always the key. Had to be the best, one of the best. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other thing too is you and I and many others, the projects and the gardens that we designed and built are going to be part of our legacy, because they're going to stay there, the ones that we did.
Mhm.
And I think that's important.
Mhm.
It's something I think about.
Mhm.
And I say, those gardens are still going to be there that you designed, you won awards with, and with others in the association
Mhm.
did it. In my day, it was a drafting board
Say so.
by hand. At the end of my career, it was all done on computers.
Mhm.
And I always felt that you had to be as artistic, whether you did it by hand or you did it on a computer. But
Mhm.
what I enjoyed the most was I could be with the architect and say, hey, that swimming pool, move it over 2 feet. See that tree, move it over, move it back 10 feet, bing, bing, bing.
Yeah.
And it was done. It was incredible. That's not something you learn. I think you either have it or you don't have it. And I had that ability to do that. And I had the ability to talk to, clients or customers about. And then after that, I would bring the architect and I want this, 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 and this, and this. And they'd put their input. And then we always had the customers come to our office to see their plans. And these are minor things. But in our conference room, if Mr. and Mrs. Lavoie were coming to see their plans, they would have been on the table. And down in the corner would be the gardens of the Lavoies. And people would walk in, they see their name on the plan. That meant a lot to them because that's the reason why we had them to come to our office, Jack, is because I wanted them to see the office, meet the staff, sit with me plus the architect together and discuss just their project together. And then I wanted that when they left, they would get in the car and say, gee, we hired them to do the design work. We should hire them to do the work. Because basically that's our plans had to sell, the contract for us.
Mhm.
And that was all part of the marketing, if you want to call it that. And, they would come to the office, you have a nice impression, they meet some of the staff. And, till later on in my career, I switched over and I did cost plus, which was fun. At one of the conventions that I went in Washington, I had dinner with a gentleman who was in charge of all the landscaping for the city of Pittsburgh. And so we were talking about bids and how do you decide who gets the contracts? And he was smart. He told me how he did it. He said, I need 3 bids and a rule of thumb, 1 high, 1 middle, and 1 low. So what he did, because I did it too when I give out subcontracts and everything, he takes the 3 bids, he totals them up, and he divides it by 3. And he gives a contract to the closest one.
Oh.
And he knows that the guy's going to make a profit, the job's going to be done well and everything. And I said, wow.
That's smart.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his philosophy. That's the way he gave out his contracts in the city of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
So when I came and I gave out subcontracts and I got 3, that's what I did. I used that formula.
Yeah.
And I thought it was so smart. One of the biggest challenges I had in most cases was the client could go out and get 2 other bids.
Yeah.
They'd call me in and they say, Claude, we can get the same project done for 20% cheaper than you. Why should we hire you? And that's where I had to sell myself. Design is going to be excellent. The work is going to be done in such and such period of time. All the guarantees you're going to have, and I'm going to be involved in your project. And I said, you're going to pay me an extra 20 or 15% to do this, and you're going to save a lot of money. And that's the biggest selling job that I had to do. Because every time I went to a prospective's home, I would always come 10 minutes early and I'd go up and down the streets. And I wanted to get a feel of what the landscaping was in that area. And before I went in the house, I took a tour in the backyard to get a good feel of what they had and what they needed. But a lot of friends used to say to me, Claude, you work for a lot of wealthy people. He said, do you ever wish you had what they had? I said, no, never. I have no jealousy at all, but I'm really proud that they've asked me to design and to do all the landscaping around their their properties.
Exactly. Well,
That was my philosophy, is quality, 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 and do the best that you can, and that's your best advertising. Just here, he was a billionaire. I did their home in St. Eustache about 15 years. We put in a pool, landscaped it all. A couple of years later, he calls me, he says, come and have a coffee. So I'm sitting with him and his wife, and he turns around to me and he said, Claude, I want you to know that we're going to buy the house down the street. And he said, I want your opinion. So my tongue twirled 6 times. And I told him honestly, I said, I think you're making a mistake. I said, why are you buying it? He said, because I have the money. I want to make my wife happy. And she loves the inside, the way the inside of the house has been designed. I said, do you realize the house this one I just showed you, you have the view on the lake. You have no obstruction whatsoever. And at this house, you got 2 other houses behind you. You got cars, all kinds. You're going to lose the look of the privacy that you have in your own property. And he turns around to me and he says, Claude, if my wife was your wife, what would you do? Talk about being, on the spot.
Yeah.
Turned my tongue 6 times again. And I said, I'll tell you honestly what I can do, or what I would do. I would knock this house down and build a house of your dreams.
Oh, wow. What a
That's
great
what
advice.
they did.
Yes.
And
what
they
great
moved.
advice.
They moved out for 1.5 years. And that's the house that was built. And then I landscaped. Well, these pictures will show you. We probably worked there 2 summers to get it all done.
Wow.
And that's why I say one of the most impressive things in my career are all the people that I have met and worked for. And like I said to you before, we did a lot of small little jobs too.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said to you, young married couple, couple $1,000, we go in and do some planting, and they're there. Oh my gosh, they're so happy.
Mm-hmm.
We're all different.
Exactly.
And I always felt, during the year, we probably did 40, 45 projects. And there was always maybe 2 or 3 that you couldn't satisfy no matter what you did.
Yeah.
But the rest were satisfied.
Yeah, exactly.
And word of mouth is still the most important.
Yeah.
And probably the nicest one that I had is up here. And it was a project we did in Nursery, and in the La Presse, they did a big article and pictures. And I loved what they had in the heading of the page. It said, Daccord pour le jardin. Yeah. And what I did, like a fellow like him, he interviewed me and everything. Then I went and planted a couple of trees at his home.
Yeah, you're right on.
That's all advertising, Jack. That's all part of marketing.
That's beautiful.
It was in the press. It was huge. Over the years, you have articles in the paper and about you, and you throw them in. I've got 30 awards down in my storage area that I don't know what to do with. I've got others here. I've got 30. And I said, what are my kids going to do with these 30 awards?
Exactly.
But what I did is I put together an album.
Wow.
And this is the album. That's one of the projects that we won first prize in Quebec.
Wow.
And in the back is, I'll read it to you. In this album, you will find some of my most beautiful and favorite landscape projects. The respect, recognition, and honors that I have achieved over the years have been because I followed my dreams. I have spent my career creating environments to make people happy. That has been my passion and my legacy. And then what I do is inside, I dedicate it to my 3 kids. And in here, there's probably 25 of some of the projects
Wow.
that I did. It's
Mhm.
something that you should think about doing.
I think so. You're right. That's great.
And then I have this one here, which is made up of all articles that were written about me. And I got around to doing all this. And now when I go to visit like my daughter in Richmond Hill, I find this album sitting on her coffee table in her home. And I wanted that my grandkids and generations to come after them would know what Grandpa did during his career.
Bravo.
And you know how much respect I have for you and how we met and the friendship which we have. I cherish it an awful lot, and it's great just talking to you. So he went on to McGill, became an engineer, and then he was instrumental in the building of the Place Ville Marie at that time, which was one of the biggest commercial buildings in Canada. So my brother was the engineer on that project, and his little brother did all the landscaping at Place Ville Marie.
Wow.
And I could tell you I could tell you stories about Place Ville Marie, because I was working with a not a landscape architect, a guy from Pi Associates, New York, who were in charge of the whole project. And they wanted so I sold them on the idea that we had to plant Norway maples and we had some Austrian pines were the main things, but they wanted something that looked mature, that had been there for a long time. There was no nursery in Canada that was growing mature large trees. So I researched it and I found a nurseryman in New York State. And we both went down there to take a look, and I was absolutely impressed. That's all he had was 3-inch caliber and up of trees.
Wow.
So I bought a ton of trees from him, but we had a minor problem, is certification to get the trees out of New York State into Canada.
Oh.
So he said, Claude, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And in a matter of days, I got my permit to bring the trees. It was like one of the most important commercial buildings ever built in Canada at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember the president at the opening ceremonies telling all the reporters and everyone how they wanted to give the Canadian touch to it, and they brought in maple trees, but he didn't tell them all that they all came from New York State. I got a call from the CEO of the Botanical Gardens one year, and it was his name, I forget his first name. He was one of the Desmarais family, and he asked me to come down and meet him. So the International Shade Tree of Canada was going to hold their world convention in Montreal at the Queen Elizabeth. So he brought me down there and he says, I want you as president. I wasn't even a member. So he had me go to Toronto, attend, I forget, 1 or 2 meetings and everything. And anyways, they elected me, and he wanted me to be the MC, and I could speak both languages, and I hired Les Fous Follets, the dance group. I hired all French Canadians, and mostly were Americans and European. And it was incredible how he asked me to do that for him.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the Montreal Botanical Garden was another interesting relationship that I had was with Pierre Bourque.
Okay.
Pierre Bourque was the CEO of the Montreal Botanical Gardens, and he eventually became the mayor, much to my surprise, of Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
But after Expo, a few years later, Jack, in Montreal and Quebec, they hosted Les Fleurs-Rallies. And that was countries that put in exhibits, and like I did a couple of them. I did one for the government of British Columbia and everything. And that's where my relationship with Pierre Bourque came about. And then when he was finished as mayor, I understand he went to China and he developed and built some gardens in China itself. But I haven't heard from him for years and years. So there were 2 connections there with the Montreal Botanical Gardens, and I'm sure you know it, but as far as the botanical gardens go, they're rated the 5th best botanical garden in the world.
Mhm.
We could talk about McDonald's for a whole day.
Mhm.
Things that I've learned.
Yeah.
Jack, let me give you an example. This is important. McDonald's has never given a order on paper or a contract on paper. They had still at that time, Ray Kroc, the founder. If you did business with him, you gave a handshake. That was it. I
Okay.
got a call on a Thursday around 3 or 4 o'clock. Kevin McGuire says to me, I am the construction guy from McDonald's, and we are opening our first McDonald's in Laval, and my job is on the line. I need a miracle.
Oh,
And you've been referred to. So I said, okay, I'll meet you tomorrow morning. He said, no, it's too late. I need you now.
oh boy.
And what McDonald's did at the beginning, when they opened up one of their stores, they would invite different mayors from different cities where they were trying to build a McDonald's. I arrived there, we worked, Jack, night and day. All right. By Saturday noon, they had what they call hamburger wine party. We had about 75% of the work completed. And then the president, George Cohan, came to me and thanked me for what I did. And he said, after the meeting, I want to show you a couple other McDonald's. So he got in my car. We went to Laval, and then we came to the West Island on St. John's Road. And he said, Claude, I give you 10 minutes to look at the site. Tell me how much you need to do a decent job here. I had 10 minutes. And he said, we're having a problem with the residents behind us. That they're going to City Hall causing us problems. Solve the problem. So I had my day timer booked for appointments, just like this here, which I still use. And he takes it out and he writes in 10 days. We're having a hamburger wine party here. And he said, I want you and your kids here. 10 days. And I remember, he said, how much? I said, at that time, 13,000. He said, that's a lot, do it.
My
And
God.
that's the way McDonald's were run. Jack, I could tell you stories incredible with McDonald's. I got a phone call by the manager in Quebec in the month of November. He said, Claude, George Cohan is giving a presentation in, I think their head office somewhere in Illinois near Chicago. So the Canadian president is making a presentation and he wants to show some of the stores here in Montreal with the landscaping. And I said to him, I says, hey, this is November, look outside and it's snowing. He said, Claude, we need a miracle. They always needed miracles at the last time. So what did I do? I got on the phone and I got a truckload of chrysanthemums to come down. So we went, broke the hard ice, we had soil, and then after that they came in and they photographed it.
Oh my gosh.
When we had the Olympics, which were held indoors at the Montreal Forum, McDonald's had a store on the corner of Atwater, right in front of the Montreal Forum. I get a phone call, and he said, Claude, we need another miracle. I said, what now? And he said, all the major managers of McDonald's throughout the world, the key, are all coming to Montreal for the Olympics. I had 4 days, Jack. On the corner of Atwater and St. Catherine. And the store was way low compared to the street. They had these big planters. So I did it.
Amazing.
And one of the nice things, and that was always the story with McDonald's. And like I told you, never signed a contract, never, always on a handshake.
Wow.
The general manager of McDonald's at that time, Kevin McGuire, took me to a new project in, I think in Laval. And I worked at the quotation. It was about $35,000. So he says, go ahead, do it. So when I did it, everything worked well, Jack. The labor was fine. The materials were on sign. We didn't have to deal with rain. Everything worked well. When I looked at the figures, and I got my markup in there, 30,000. So every Wednesday, McGuire, the general manager, would go to Toronto for meetings. But I went to see him and I brought him my invoice for $30,000. He almost fell off his chair. When the hell does a contractor ever come below budget? He went to Toronto on the Wednesday. He came back on Thursday. He called me to the office, gave me my check and said, the president said to say thank you for what you've done, and you're going to work for McDonald's for a long time.
Wow.
So that was $5,000 that I gave back. I had the same situation with a wealthy guy in Westmount, and I did all his work. And then one day the bookkeeper came in and said, Claude, he's paid us too much. I said, why? Because he's paid us off a US account. So I forget what the amount was that he overpaid us, because he paid us in American money. So I said, make me up the check. I forget, it could have been $3,000-4,000. And I went to see him. And I gave him the check and told him what had happened. He turned around to me. He said, well, everybody in the Jewish community is going to know what you did. So to me, those two decisions were huge. Were huge. We talk about marketing and advertising. I'm a strong advocate of being honest. And if we're honest with our clients and everything.
Yeah.
So those were just two investments that I made. That brought me back a lot of work.
Yeah.
I get an invitation to, there's a building on the Mount Royal at Beaver Lake. Well, McDonald's were holding a dinner dance for their long-term employees. And I was invited. And I really didn't know what to expect. So what they were doing, the president was there, and they were giving out the awards to 5-year, 10-year, 15-year people. And I'm sitting at a table with a franchise guy from Quebec. And he hits me, he says, Claude, they're calling you. And yeah, they called me up there, and look. Can you see that?
Yes, I can.
They presented that to me. And then they also gave me this. And I was the only supplier that they honored that night. I mean, these are the kind of things money doesn't buy, Jack.
Yeah, probably.
These are things that are so important in our life, no matter what we do. And you ask what would be my legacy, or would I feel, or that people would feel about me in the future. And I just personally would think that I was a role model. And the quality of my work was important. And I encouraged and spoke to a lot of students, and I've mentored a lot of people. And I want to be remembered that we were honest, hardworking, and did quality work, but devoted a lot of my time to associations. And then there's a few other people that might have been interest for you. And that had to be, there was the owner of the Montreal Canadiens and Montreal Alouettes. His name was Don Durand. And I did his home. And he says, Claude, do you like football? I says, yeah. He said, the Alouettes are going to the Grey Cup in Toronto. I got 2 tickets for you. So he gave me 2 tickets for the next 3 years that the Alouettes went to Toronto for the Grey Cup, and they lost every one. Then there was a player for the Montreal Canadiens. His name was Floyd Curry. And I did his home in NDG. And when you walk into his house, he's got a huge portrait. He was a defensive guy. He was a third line right winger. And his claim to fame was he scored a hat trick the night that the Queen of England was visiting Canada and they took her to a hockey game.
Oh my goodness.
And, yeah, and the Queen came down, they introduced her to Floyd, and he had a huge photograph there.
That's good.
Then the Montreal Canadiens had a coach by the name of Dick Irvin, and he was coach of the Canadiens for 16 years. And I did work for him, and he was like a mentor to me. And he used to raise these pigeons, and he also raised Palomino ponies. And where the Rockland Shopping Center exists today is where he used to rent a barn, and I used to go help him. And he would call me up and he says, come to the Forum tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, and you're going to see some of the best hockey that's ever played. What he would do, he took all the rookies, put them in a dressing room, says, you guys want to make the NHL, you got to beat those guys over there. Then he would go to the veterans, say, those guys are out here to get your job, you better hustle. And, they had referees and everything. And then he'd call me up sometimes and say, hey, Claude, you got a date on the weekend? I got tickets for you for the Ice Capades or the Ice Follies. When he was terminated with the Canadiens after 16 years, he was hired by the Chicago Blackhawks. But in the summer, he fell sick. And I was in his, visiting him in his bedroom when he got a phone call from Tommy Ivan, who was the general manager of the Chicago Blackhawks. And he told Dick he's coming to Montreal and he wants to meet with him. Dick was sick. He didn't want to see him. So he ad-libbed so he wouldn't come. And he did his 2 years as coach of the Chicago Blackhawks. And the first time, back then in those days, Jack, there was only 6 teams in the NHL. Chicago and New York were always the worst. So the first time that Chicago came to play the Montreal Canadiens, he invited me down, says, come down to the dressing room. And he had all the sports writers in the dressing room, and the players were out for their 15-minute workout. And what he said to the players, he said, I've filled the arena full here every time. He said, I guess there may be just only a couple of thousand people who watch the Chicago Blackhawks. Then there was a pitcher for the Montreal Expos. His name was Bill Stoneman.
Yeah, I remember Bill.
And I did his home, and he and I became friends. And he has pitched 2 no-hitters. So all that is in the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. And that's where we went to visit because of him. Then one of my older sons was playing on the inner city baseball team, and he decided to have a father and son game. So I called Bill. I said, hey, Bill, I said, would you like to come? And you're going to play with us. You come for dinner. And I said, I know you're so busy. You got so many invitations. No, he says, we don't, Claude. People think we're that busy. He was glad. When we arrived and stepped on the diamond, and the guys looked, and I said, he's pitching for the Fathers. You should have seen their reaction. And Bill was, he married an airline stewardess, a French Canadian here from Quebec. So at the end of one of the seasons, he went to management. He says, look, my home's here. I have a home in Sendville. I said, I want to get my contract signed and everything, and I have peace for the whole summer. But they didn't call him.
Oh.
So then he was a holdout. And then training camp started a week ahead till they finally realized he wasn't going to come, and they agreed on their contract. And Bill drove down like almost nonstop to join the training camp. And he was 1 week behind in pitching. And he pitched too much, too quick. He threw out his arm.
Oh.
The Expos always had in downtown Montreal a day where the fans could come and they'd introduce all the players. They came back from Florida in the evening, and they were supposed to go down. He was supposed to go down and join the teammates downtown. He gets a phone call at 5 o'clock in the morning and said, "We've traded you to Los Angeles."
Oh my God.
Just bought his home, everything. And that ruined his career. I think he ended about 4 wins, 2 losses in Los Angeles. And then he became the CEO of the Expos, and then he became the CEO of Los Angeles, and they won the World Cup. Then I'll throw a few other stories to you, the kind of people I worked for. During my career, I worked for 3 people from the underworld
Oh.
who I didn't know.
Oh.
And I'll tell you about one.
Okay.
He had a big house in Beaconsfield down by the water. So he hired me to do it. And I saw all these muscle-bound guys around his home, and I befriended one of them. Then I found out what he was doing, and he took me down in his basement, and in the floor of the basement, cemented in the floor, were all the money vaults. And they used to come up the lakeshore and the St. Lawrence, and they would bring all the money, and that's where the money went.
Oh my gosh.
So we did a big job there, Jack. And every Friday he'd go to the superintendent and he'd give him a couple $100. He says, "Keep 100 for you, give 20 to all the other guys." I had a problem. All my staff wanted to work there. And then he'd come to me. He said, "Hey, Claude, you got a hot date on the weekend?" So obviously I said, yes. He said, "Be my guest. You come to my restaurant." He owned Ruby Foods,
Oh,
the
yeah.
best restaurant in Montreal. He owned it.
Wow.
So I went there with my date. And the last thing I heard was they tried to kill him in the El Morocco nightclub, which was the nightclub just beside the Montreal Forum, and they missed it. And then I heard that he was on a plane somewhere, and we never heard from him again.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So when I say the people that I've worked for have made my life very, very interesting.
I would say, yeah.
I'll tell you another story about our former Prime Minister, Pierre Trudeau.
Okay.
I did work for him in Outremont and for his sister in Outremont.
Okay.
And he arrived on the job when I wasn't there. And he introduced himself to my Spanish foreman. And he wanted him to take them all around and tell him the name of the trees. And when I arrived on the job, the Spanish foreman was jumping about 5 feet high, the Prime Minister of Canada. And I guarantee you that all the Spanish votes went to Pierre Trudeau. Then I worked for his sister, and she was married to a dentist, Dr. Rouleau. And one day we're having coffee, and she said, "Did I ever tell you about Pierre's wedding?" I said, "No." Pierre calls his sister and says, "Only 2 people are going to know," because he was dating at that time that flower girl, Sinclair, who was very, very young compared to him. And he says, "Only 2 people are going to know, you and the head of my caucus, because we're going to have a meeting at the caucus. You're going to take the train at Windsor. You'll be there at noon. Then I've got a plane, and we're going to fly out to my wedding." On the Friday night, we got a major snowstorm, and you can judge what 30 inches of snow is.
Yeah.
So she had to tell her husband. He didn't want to go. She didn't even tell him it was his wedding. He said, "I'm fed up of going to all these receptions. I'm not going."
Oh.
So she had a job to convince him to come. So they get on the train, and 30 inches of snow. So many people downtown Montreal had to sleep at hotels and everything.
What?
Well, they came on the microphone and said, "We will be leaving in such time." Then they came a second time, and they said, "Yes, we're still leaving, but we're leaving at such a time." And then the third call was, "We're not leaving."
Oh.
Then they couldn't get home. Then she had to pull strings to get them a room at the Windsor Hotel. And when they got in the room, her husband blasted her because he didn't want to go.
Oh, jeez.
And this is the way that she missed Pierre Trudeau's wedding.
My
Yeah. Everyone has a story, Jack.
Yeah.
You know, I was doing a project way outside Montreal on the West Island, past Regal. And it was a huge house, and it was all closed in, Jack. Nobody could see. So I had an appointment with my client for 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was summer, and it was a screen door. So I rang the bell, and she says, Claude, come on in. She says, I'll make you a coffee. So I go in. My men were working. She comes down in a total negligee, everything exposed.
Oh, shit.
I'm at the table, and I said, I can't. What? What? I'm a nature lover, but what? So I make like, you know, I do this every day. And I can tell you one thing, it took me a long time to drink that cup of coffee. But better than that, Jack,
Oh, God.
she then said to me, okay, let's go out and see what's going on. I said, is she serious? Yeah, she was serious. As soon as we stepped out the door, the operator of the bulldozer shut off his throttle. The guy that was pushing the wheelbarrow with dirt tipped it over, and the gardener who was in the beds with a rake dropped his rake. And we walked around the whole property together. You know what? I found out later she was one of the top striptease dancers in Montreal. So for her to go almost naked in front of everybody was no problem. Then you were asking about what did I do with my free time? And I've already answered you. I spent a lot of time with my kids, and I loved it. And like the two boys were hockey players here. I went to Quebec City, where you lived, to the Pee Wee tournament for 4 years. They played in the Jean Beliveau game at the Montreal Forum, and we hosted the Francophone team from Quebec, and vice versa. When we went there, they took care of our kids. And my boys, after playing here, played U.S. college hockey, played professional hockey in Switzerland. I went and drove to their games here in Montreal and in Quebec. Then I would drive to the United States because both of them were playing there to see games there. And then later on, I would hop at an airplane and go see them play and visit with them in Switzerland.
Hey.
So when I say hockey was important in my career, it was. Then another thing that I did, I always loved sports and to play sports. And one of the things, I was with my two sons, and one day a friend asked them, he says, of all you guys have done in your hockey careers and everything, where did you have the most fun? And one of them answered, he said, playing hockey in the summer with our dad.
Wow.
And a bunch of the old timers, we all brought our sons in, and we rented ice each week. And we'd bring our sons to play. And Brian was a goaltender, and every time he would stop me, he would laugh. And then I'd say to his brother, give me the damn puck, because I want to put it in behind him. And then after that, we would go to the restaurant, have dinner together. And I was taken back how much they appreciated the fun that father and son playing hockey together. And when Brian decided to be a goaler, I may have mentioned to you, after that game that I brought him first time to Montreal Forum, the next day he had a game. They won 5-0, and he scored all 5 goals. Oh. And that's when he came to me and wanted to be a goaler. And I did everything too, and I couldn't win. He won. So then I put a rink in the backyard. I called a friend, Floyd Curry, to get me an old practice net of the Canadians. I put boards, I put lights up, and Tom and I would go out there and shoot pucks at Ryan hour after hour. All the neighborhood kids would be in the backyard and skating, and my daughter would bring their friends out, and it was like, oh, it was so much fun. Then, because I had played sports a lot, I got bored. So then I got involved into bowling. I took up bowling. And after a year or two, I got pretty good. And I was playing in tournaments and winning some tournaments. But at that time, there was a show every Sunday afternoon live called L'Heure des Quilles. And attendance-wise, next to hockey, it was the next one. So I qualified and I played a fair amount of time in those tournaments. And then the PBA of the states decided to hold their first tournament in Canada, and they had it at Laurentian Lanes, where I was captain of the bowling team. And then they had a tournament for Canadians, because 3 could qualify to play with the best bowlers in the world. And like any other sport, you know, you get hot sometimes, you're terrible other times. I just got hot, and I qualified as one of the 3 that played with the top bowlers. And I learned so much, Jack, because I always say in sport, 10% of the players make 90% of the money.
Exactly.
So you had the top bowlers, they're all staying at the Queen Elizabeth Hotel. And the young guys were sleeping in their cars in Laurentian Lanes, hoping to make some money, could help them go on to the next tournament.
Amazing.
So I was able to play with them for maybe the first day. And then after that, I went this way and they went that way. But it was a terrific experience.
I believe it.
And I recall I would make maybe during the winter $3,000-4,000, and that would pay for our Florida vacation. So, you know, then I gave it up because then the kids were getting involved and I wanted to spend time with them. I formed a hockey club here. And that, what I mean by that is that we would show in the cinema here a game or 2 a month of the Montreal Canadiens. And we'd fill up the cinema, and women would bring food and make food, and we would follow the game. It was great. And then I organized a hockey pool. And you bet $5 on who would score the last goal. And in the 2 years that we did, we raised over $4,000 for the West Island Palliative Care here on the West Island.
Wow.
And then they asked me to be an MC. We had concerts here every Sunday, and we had professional entertainers that would come. And they asked me to be one of the MCs, which I accepted. And I did it once each month, but we haven't seen any for a couple of months because of the virus.
Exactly.
And then one day I read that they had made a film of the Expo 50th year anniversary, which was a couple of years ago. So I said, I'm going to bring somebody, I want to go. So I registered. I chose a friend of mine here who was an architect from Mexico. And we went and we saw the film. The next morning, I went to see the manager here. And I said, most of the people living here lived here during the Expo years. And I said, I saw a beautiful film on Expo. So we organized it, so we held it here. The only thing is, I had called the producer and he was all for it. They came up here, put up a little booth with all Expo things that people could buy. They gave a talk of what went on. And instead of holding it for one night, it was so popular that we had to run it 3 nights.